students, welcome back. I am extremely excited. I know I say that every single time I start a video, but this time I'm really excited because I would say my dear friend Sonya is here with us, and she has just so much expertise, but she's going to talk to you today about one of her very favorite topics. And you're going to see she's very passionate about this topic of controls. But I'm going to kick it over to you, Sonya, to just tell the students a little bit about yourself. I know you're going to tell them already that you're an MSU grad, but if you were going to forget that, I just told them so.
Yes, well, thank you for that great introduction, Joe. Yes, I am an MSU grad, and so is my husband, and we helped revitalize the ASO. So if you are not a member of the ASO, please join, attend the meetings. You will gain a lot from it, networking, meeting great professionals, learn a lot about the profession. And it's just really, it also later on, I'll talk about speaking and stuff. You can have opportunities to get up in front of, professionals and your peers, and it's very low key. So I definitely agree getting involved in the ASO. It's dear to my heart. And a little bit about my background is I actually started in restaurants, and I thought I was going to be a restaurateur, and that was my passion. And I did that for 13 years. And then because I wasn't educated, I began to be partners with someone who, when I went on vacation, they closed the restaurant down, and I was left with no money to pay my bills and no job. And I had an uncle who was a CPA, and I was like, well, I'm good at keeping books. I'm going to go try that. So I thought I would go back to school, continued waiting tables because it was good money. But I did go back to school and got my accounting degree. I am a CPA. I am a CFE, and could not be happier. I do a lot of internal audit and thought about going and getting my CIA, but that is a tip that I have for you. Get your certifications right after school. Don't wait till you've been in your career 20 years. It's much easier to do it right coming out of school. So get all those letters behind your name right after school. It's much easier to stay on the studying track. And I've done a little bit of everything. When I came out of school, I did an internship in tax, figured out that was not for me. And then I audited for several years and then moved over into the consulting arm of public accounting. So, I've done a little bit of everything, seen different things. And that is also advice, do those internships because they're very valuable in helping you learn what it is that you want to do. Of course, we want you to do internal audit, and it opens many doors, but still get out there and see. I think that's a good thing to do while you're in college and have that opportunity. And you can get class credits for doing that as well. So I always encourage people to do internships. So I guess my takeaways from my intro: join the ASO and do some internships.
I love it. You jumped to like my last question that I always ask my professionals that I'm interviewing is, what's your tip and advice to students? So we just got that out of the way first. I love it. Okay, so let's dive into this topic of internal controls, because when I asked my network of professionals, like probably 50 plus, individuals. So Sonya is on both the Denver IIA Institution of Internal Auditors Board, as well as our MSU Denver Internal Audit Advisory Board here. I asked both those boards to sign up for topics to talk to my courses about, and Sonya immediately picked internal controls, and her comment, not very many people put comments in, I will tell you, on my Sign Up Genius, but she put, I'm a control freak. And so I want her to explain why she loves controls so much. And I will tell you, she trains organizations on the importance of control. So she is literally, when I say an expert and the best person to talk to you about this, she really is. So Sonya, take it away.
Yeah, so I am a control freak, and my clients, my teammates, Joe, everyone that knows me, I put it out there. And really it started in restaurants. As I stated, I wasn't educated then, but I had a lot of controls. Like we would check, and make sure that our inventory, what we had for the day, is what we sold. And we would do those reconciliations. Alcohol, like if you think about your risk in a restaurant, people over pouring the alcohol, their friend comes in, they give the alcohol away. So doing those counts So I did a lot of internal controls before I even knew what they were. So coming into the profession, I was like, oh my goodness, like that is what, and if you know about restaurants, most of them will be under in 2 years. And I think a lot of times it's because people don't put those checks and balances, the controls in place around their product, the food. Used to it was money because cash was, exchanging hands, and there was the risk of that. But nowadays with credit cards, that risk has gone down a lot. But that's where I became very passionate about controls. Fast forward into my career now, being on the front line when Enron failed, companies were always saying, oh, we have internal controls. But then when you really started digging into it, these companies didn't have controls. And the thing with me is over the years, now they say, oh, only large accelerated filers. Well, let's think about this. The companies who really need to be paying attention to controls are smaller companies. Those larger companies, they have 50 people in their accounting department. They're able to segregate the duties and everything. These smaller companies, you may have one person wearing multiple hats. And if you're not overseeing if there's no segregation of duty and there's not good controls in place, then, that could lead to fraud. So, that's why I became so passionate about controls, is I didn't know what they were and I was always passionate about them. And now that I know what they are, I'm even more passionate about them because it's just good business. Anyone that's in business should have internal controls in place.
Yeah, and I think part of it is the language barrier, right? It's just the word controls. And I've used this in previous videos. It's like the biz speak, right? We talk about risks and controls, and it seems so overwhelming to business owners, like you said, small business owners or people working in a restaurant. So I think part of what we can do, and part of what I want the students to understand, is that they can educate anybody anywhere they work about controls. They don't have to be this really complicated thing. And I think one thing I think you're getting at, and that I want you to explain, is how to tell them the why, right? And so I know you're really good about even explaining why we do things like lock our own front doors, as analogies, right? I mean, don't you feel like that's the big aha moment maybe people get, is when you tell them the why we're doing the controls?
Yes. And I mean, having the why behind understanding your risk, and like you say, it's the words sometimes that overwhelm people. But step back, and in your personal life, as you stated, you lock your door. We look at our credit card statements. I mean, okay, I'm going to admit I'm not the best. I don't balance my checkbook. Okay. There's many accountants out there that we don't, but I monitor my account. I'm looking at it daily. If I see a charge, I may call up the credit card company, inquire about it. So in our personal life, we do have controls. So if you just think about what the risk is, like I've had someone steal my credit card before, even though it was in my possession. The risk is that someone's going to fraudulently use my card. So you monitor that and you take a look at your expenditures. And if you don't recognize that transaction, then you call the bank. So this is, when you go apply it to companies, then think about the things that these are controls we have in our own life. So you go apply them to businesses as well. And businesses, there's more layers and everything, but controls, it's just understanding what is the risk and then how can you mitigate that risk? Or are you willing to take on the risk? Because maybe like with our credit card companies, they're pretty good if you catch it. They will, the risk is I may not have to pay for it. If I catch it soon enough and alert them, then they're going to cover that charge. So you have to look, and, there's always a cost benefit analysis too, because some clients are like, I'm going to take the risk because maybe I can't. I had a client who they were a small shop, 2-person shop, and their controller had access to the GL as an admin. So she was in the ERP. So we implemented controls that people looked at transactions that occurred as the administrator. So, but they took the risk, they couldn't just go outsource IT. They were a small company. They didn't have the funds to either hire an IT person or to outsource it to someone. So it is also a cost benefit analysis that you have to do around controls.
Yeah, and like we've talked about, or the students will hear probably in later modules, is this idea of risk tolerance, right? And so you have to figure out what your risk tolerance is, and then, you're going to put the type of control might determine, or change depending on your risk tolerance, right? You might put in a preventive if you have less risk tolerance, or a detective after the fact, month end control if you have more risk tolerance. So students, you'll understand more about that a little bit later on. Now, Sonya, you work in a professional services firm. So tell us a little bit about, your day-to-day job. What does it look like working with controls? As you can tell us as an external auditor or an internal auditor, because I know you know both sides of that, but it kind of explain that to the students.
Yeah. So, and I love what I do because there's variety. That's why I have been in public accounting my whole career. And I had a partner tell me I was a lifer. And I was like, what does that mean? He goes, you're never leaving public. And probably because I get to see such a variety of different applications of seeing controls. So I work on internal audits where I'll go in and do, I audit against code because I do a lot of school districts. However, we're looking at their internal controls. Like we did one of the most recent ones, we did a procurement audit. So we'll go and we'll look at their policy, which I really like it because it lays it out. This is what you're supposed to do. Whereas in other engagements, we'll talk about it's not as laid out, but this, they have a policy, you're auditing to the policy, and these should be their controls. Are they complying? So we'll look at that. So those are one type of engagement. As external auditors, you come in, you do a risk assessment. I was around, as I stated, the first years of Sarbanes-Oxley, and we didn't do a risk assessment, and we were testing petty cash. I mean, how many times would you have to steal petty cash for it to be $1 million? I mean, it's never going to happen in a year if you have $1,000 in there. So, you do the risk assessment, which I know you all will be learning about risk assessment and looking at, the impact, because if it's only $1,000 and you have $100 petty cash, you're not going to look at that. So external auditors do that piece. And then I do some SOX consulting as well, where my clients call me the good cop and they call their external the bad cop. Although we're doing the same job, but we're working with management to help them. We may even identify control deficiencies because we test controls just as the auditors do. We perform walkthroughs, but we will work with them to help them correct those deficiencies and determine where the breakdown in those controls lie. And I'll tell you, sometimes it's, system driven. We've learned over the years, you just don't want to say, oh, Sonya was hired, give her Joe's roles, because Joe may have been given multiple roles and you really don't want me to have it. So, we've learned a lot since Sarbanes-Oxley first came out. Oh my gosh, has it been 20 some plus years?
I think it's almost 20 years, isn't it? Was it 03 or 04?
I think it's 01 I started. I don't think, because we had to get it in place for it implemented, right?
That's right.
So,
yeah. There was lots before it, actually it was required.
I think it's been 20 years plus now. With that. So, it's evolved, but as I've stated, controls are good business. I don't care if you're public or not, you need to have controls in place. I had someone reach out just a week ago and they had found fraud in their company. And it's because they didn't do the background check. They thought they did the background check, but they didn't. And when they Googled this person, they found out they had committed fraud and only been out of jail for 2 months before they hired him.
Oh my goodness.
So, I mean, having these controls.
The background check is a control, right? It seems like a process that we do, but it's also a control point because it mitigates the risk of hiring somebody. And so I think that's where a lot of people get a little bit confused. And they think controls are extra work. Sonya and I have talked about this, but if you're doing your process right and you're doing your job really effectively, controls should just be built in because they're safeguards, right? I mean, this is safeguards to make sure we're getting the right people in our organization and money's not walking out the door. And you would think that people would embrace controls, but they don't always, right, Sonya?
No. They do not. They do not. There's always pushback. But then once you explain it, and tell them what they do in their personal life, I do see the light bulb come on a lot of times where people are like, oh, this does make sense. It's not just additional work. It's good business. It's good business practices.
Yeah. And so what would you say are the most important controls that a company, I guess maybe it depends on the size, right? So there might be an it depends answer, but what do you see as kind of the critical controls?
I think segregation of duties. I have known many companies that have had fraud committed because they had one person who was doing everything and they were trusting them, and it ended up costing them in the end. I had a client 1.5 million,
Wow.
but the lady wrote the check. She did the bank recs. I mean, they were a small company. They weren't able to segregate, but they learned really quickly that, to your point, those detective controls, they found it by looking at, this shows how long ago it was, looking through the checks and noticed that a signature was not their signature.
Yeah.
And that's how they brought it up. So segregation of duties, even if you have to be creative. I mean, I had clients that were very small and I'd walk in the door and they're like, the receptionist is saying, Sonia's here. What's going to be put on my plate today? Because they were a 3-person company. So I wanted to make sure there was segregation. So we did give some things to the receptionist just to be able to segregate the duties. So I do think, having the segregation of duties in place, automate as much as you can. If you can have IT controls, I think positive pay is the best. It was not in place many years ago. And that is where companies submit. They have an individual who did not cut the checks, will go submit the checks or the ACHs that the company's approving. So if you show up with a check and go to cash it, the bank will not cash it if it's not on that check run, or the ACH will get bounced back if it's a different dollar amount. So those controls were not in place before. The banks didn't offer it, but over the past 15 years they have. So I think it's relatively a quick, easy control to have in place. But thinking about the money, like where's the potential for you to lose money? Segregation of duties and have a positive pay in place.
I like that. And those are preventative, right? And preventative is obviously what we want to do more than detective controls. So let's just wrap up this talk with controls with any other tips or advice as the students start, identifying the controls in their own life or within this course. Any other last thoughts that you have?
Yeah. So what I tell my team, and I have an intern right now, I'm like, learn the process. Like, the best way is don't just focus on the controls. Understand, like, I want people to start out with easier processes like AP and payroll, and think through the process. Don't just think about the controls. Understand the process, then look at where the risks are, because it could take you different directions. Like nowadays we outsource a lot. So if you outsource payroll, there's some of those control points are not even handled internally. And so you have to understand that too. So I think the best thing anyone can do is really understand processes and what's going on. And I know with MSU, a lot of students, you have a day job and then you're going to college part-time or full-time, but you still have a job. So apply what you've learned in your job, because that's what I did. I brought the restaurant experience to the table, and thinking about those things and applying it your personal life or to controls, I think that sets you up for success.
Yeah, I love that. And I think, like we've talked about, anytime you could apply something you're learning in school to your real life, you're going to remember it. And, you mentioned that segregation of duties and small shops, the frauds that we hear about that lack controls are like nonprofits or, dentist offices. And these are things we interact with every day. And I feel like, it's great as you all start to identify risks and controls. You can help, a lot of people personally, even, and organizations that you work with. So I really appreciate that. And I also appreciate the step back and look at the big picture, the process, because I think sometimes, even when I remember training new auditors, it's like, oh, here's the list of controls. go test them. And that's not the way to train somebody. So I love the fact that you take that step back, because we can't look at life in silos like that. In the control points, we've got to look at the big picture. So great tips, Sonya. Thank you so much for being with us, and we'll see you in a later module.
Okay, thanks.